Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Jonathan Casillas. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes as we had a media session that we just listened in on. A number of players. Brian Daboll spoke earlier today, so we'll get into some of the highlights as OTAs moves forward here during Phase 3 of the offseason program. And multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring. That's option A, 201-939-4513. If you want to stay behind the computer screen, we will not judge you for that. Hashtag Giants Chat on Twitter. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show on our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcasts. So a little bit of a different feel, Jonathan, now with OTAs. You know, you were in the midst of this during your playing days. It's nice to be a spectator and watch them do all the heavy lifting as opposed to you have to go through the grind.
Well, I tell you what, this time of the year is not bad at all. You know, the weather is kind of on your side. It's not blazing hot.
That's true.
Today was a little nippy out. Had a short sleeve shirt out there. I got cold really quickly because you're not running around, you know, as a media guy.
Yes.
You know, but this is a good time right now. A lot of new guys, right? The draft picks, Waller, a lot of guys that came in free agency, is to get a head start on that playbook, right? Jump on that playbook and get things going because this is going to be the first time they get introduced, and then training camp is another. And then when the season comes, it's not really going over plays anymore. It's like, hey, these are the plays that we're running for this specific game. So this is a good way to get started on that, meet the guys in the locker room, get that chemistry that, you know, that I think championship teams have. It starts right now, today.
I want to piggyback off of a point that you were alluding to. Brian Daboll, when he spoke to the media, and he didn't get into specifics about contracts and all those other things that obviously the reporters brought up. But the one thing that I found interesting that he was asked about, Jonathan, and you've been in this situation, you have a bulk of the roster that knows the offense and the defense because there wasn't any coordinator changes, which is good. So there's continuity with respect to the makeup of the team. Then there's a bunch of the new players that you were just referencing, Waller, the rookies, and so forth. So I guess my question is, how do you walk that fine line around this time of the year where you're at the point where it's not algebra for you, to use the mathematic analogy. It's calculus almost for guys like you. Mm-hmm. But for the new guys, it's more like algebra, where you don't want to get too far ahead that they're so far behind, but you also don't want to hold yourself back if you want to actually move forward with respect to the progressions of this offense or this defense.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a reps. You know, it's repetition. You know, the guys that have been on this team from last year that were here at this time of the year, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be their fourth time seeing these plays. So we all know what makes perfect. Really nothing makes perfect, but what makes you better, right? Practice makes you better, right? The reps make you better. So in order for you to truly understand it, you have to keep seeing it over and over and over again. And then, you know, you get, like, let's say a linebacker, he has certain rules against certain offensive formations and plays. Now, if you have one defense against one offense, that's only a limited amount of information that you have. The great thing about being here at OTAs, that's why I'm always so for players being here, is that now you get to see that defense against several different plays. Now you have different routes to figure out, and it's like an equation in math. We're using math.
No, exactly.
Right? If you have one equation and you have one set of numbers that you plug into it, that's only one outcome. What you need is a whole bunch of different numbers in that equation to really figure out what that equation really means.
The different variables.
Right, exactly. So that's what they're going through right now. They're getting their defense or offense or whatever it is different ways, and they're just seeing it in different ways, and they're going against familiar players, familiar offenses, familiar routes and concepts that they've probably seen. And then for the new guys, this is beginning math. This is like when you have that prerequisite, right? You have what you're coming in, but you start from the ground because you don't know the language. You don't know the terminology. You don't know, like, even like, let's say defensively, of course, when you look at the offense, 11, 12 personnel, that's pretty much generic. When I was with Spagnuolo used to call 12 personnel Tiger personnel. He used to call 11 personnel Zebra personnel. So for somebody that's used to the number system, and you get here, like, you look like, all right, what's zebra? Like, what is that? You know, so initially you got to learn that first. Before you even learn any defensive schemes, any blitzes or anything, you got to learn terminology. So that's why I think it's very crucial and very important that all of the guys are here, especially guys that are new that get here and then just soak up as much as you can. Because like you said about the variables, you don't know when them variables are going to come out. You don't know when those other situations are going to present itself, and maybe you haven't seen it yet. But if you're at least exposed to a whole bunch of different, ways to attack the defense or offense that you're learning, that you have different ways and different outcomes, and then you can process that information a little bit faster when it comes September and October.
Well, because to use the zebra tiger story that you just told, okay, which I like, if you did not know that basic concept, Jonathan, training camp starts, how are you supposed to get into the true flow of the defense if you don't even understand the identification part? So I think to your point, that's why it's valuable to have, especially the new guys, here to learn those basic terminology so that they can move right into the flow once you get into the heart of training camp.
Yeah, and look, the great thing about this defense is that this is a second year for a lot of guys.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. We talked about Jahad Ward being here previously, not being here, but being with Wink Martindale.
Well,
previously.
he's way ahead of the curve.
Right. So he has those years.
Teach the lesson
he's probably not even paying attention in the meeting rooms. He's in the back joking with guys. But
he's drawing pictures.
The great thing about the second year for both Kafka and Wink Martindale is that they're not. It's not brand new to everybody. With that being said, there's some guys, rookies, free agents, guys that came over. It's new to them, but now you have guys that have a year underneath their belt and can actually help them. And it's not just the coaches. It is not just Wink Martindale. The coaches, the new coaches that just started working with Wink and Kafka, those guys had to have a year under their belt as well. So now you have a lot more information that's spread out with a lot more people, right? I'm pretty sure last year, if a player raised his hand right now in May and they will ask a question to a coach, the coach possibly don't know the answer. It's a possibility. Like now, that possibility is a lot smaller, you know what I mean? Because of that year underneath, the Giants' belt. And I think it's very advantageous for having a core unit that I think the Giants have, and then bringing in integral pieces who are high character guys that look like they can learn on the go, guys that look like they're very adaptable, and I'm talking about all of the guys that the Giants drafted and their free agents. I don't think when they're bringing in guys to play for the New York Giants and on this 2023 team, I don't think they're just looking at skill. I think they're looking at skill. I think they're looking at intelligence and then also character. And I think those are the type of guys that they're bringing in. So there's no question that because of their second year in both offense and defense, that the Giants will be an improved football team, not only because you got, I could say better players. They got some good players coming in this year, Waller being one of them, the kid Eric Gray, Deontay Banks, other guys that they brought in, but then also the second year underneath the defense and offense with that experience is going to help the team, I think, light years above how they started last year. And last year they did really well in the start. So I think they're above and beyond what they were last year at this time because of that basically year underneath everybody's belt besides the guys that are new this year.
Well, it allows you to play faster, too, which is what you were hitting on. And your point is well taken, Jonathan, about the coaching staff, because I remember Jerome Henderson, the DB's coach, he would talk about at this time last year, he'd have to look at some of the guys in the room who were in Wink's system to teach him some of the ins and outs of this scheme. So now he's so much more comfortable that whether it's a veteran or a rookie, he can obviously recite everything you need to know.
You got to think, right? Let's talk about like a business, like a McDonald's, right? You got a McDonald's manager, right? They've been there for multiple years, right? Then you got a new guy that they're training to be a manager, right? So that guy comes in, right? He learns for a few months. He's a manager now, right? But when somebody comes in new and asks that new manager for information, he's not going to know everything.
Correct. Yep.
So he's going to have to talk to somebody else. The good thing about being in the second year, you got a lot more managers with experience now. So when the new guys are coming in and are asking questions, the younger guys are asking questions, they can actually answer them and not be like, let me get back to you with that one, which is, I'm sure, happened a lot last year. I've been in new defenses. I know how that works. When it's a new defense, a lot of questions are being asked, and sometimes they're not being answered.
Well, because it's an experimental phase for everybody. But let me ask you this. How much of a difference do you sense when you came back the following year? Did you feel as if it was really night and day in terms of the group and everybody, even the coaching staff, being on the same page? Or was there still a bit of a learning process?
There's always a learning process. Just like when you start a school year, you're kind of rusty. You haven't been doing nothing all summer.
Yeah, because they haven't been on the field and so forth.
They haven't been doing it.
Yeah.
But it's also you got a head start. You have it in your memory. It's in there somewhere. But what you said earlier, you can play a lot faster, right?
You're not thinking as much.
So Landon Collins, right? When he got to the New York Giants back in 2000, was it 15 or 16? One of those.
Yeah, I think it was 15.
Years was his rookie year. When he came in, he's coming from Alabama, great safety, right? We drafted him in the second round, kid can play, but he had a learning curve. And what Spags did, Spags wanted him to call the defense, or at least the coverages, right? I knew the coverages. So I was like, Spags, let me call it. He was like, no, this is how we're going to do it, so let him call it. And it didn't roll off his tongue as fast as it would with me, because I was already in the system for a while with Spagnuolo in New Orleans when I was with him in 2012. And that familiarity, especially right now, it just gets you playing a lot faster. It gets you thinking and communicating a lot quicker. So sometimes the offense gets lined up. Who's communicating stuff? You got the linebacker communicating stuff to the defensive line and the back.
Vice versa.
And then now you got Xavier McKinney. You got safeties now with the green dot. So they're calling defenses out. That takes a little bit longer to go all the way down to the D line, right? So imagine offense gets set up. If you understand, you've seen this a whole bunch of times, and you get that play out and you get everything communicated in 5 seconds. Now you get to see and look and communicate what's going on instead of trying to figure out what I need to say against this formation.
Huge difference.
It makes a huge difference. And now you're set, ready to go, and not 5 seconds before the play snap trying to figure out what coverage you're in, because the safety is trying to process information in his head. Because that's all it is. Football is just like anything. Who processes information the fastest?
And who can adjust accordingly. And with you having familiarity and going through it several times before you go out there, I think you have an edge against the new guys, of course. Well, and also to piggyback off your point about Landon Collins, I think from a coaching perspective, this is the time of the year where you want players to try to call out the plays, right, or wear the green dot, because Jonathan, you don't have the time or the risk to experiment like that smack in the middle of the season when you got wins and losses. So better to throw him into the fire, right? Have a baptism by fire scenario and let him learn. And some things are going to be smooth. Some things are going to be rough. But it better to have that experience going into training camp in the regular season as opposed to week 2, somebody gets hurt who was calling the plays, right? Now you're looking around, you're like, oh boy, we need somebody like Landon to call the plays, and he hasn't had some of those experiences earlier in the spring.
And I got this. Joe Vitt, he was my linebacker coach in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And I love that guy.
He's worked with Sean Payton forever.
Yeah. He used to say this, right? He used an explicit word. I'm not going to use it, but you can fill in the blank.
You're going to keep it PG-13.
Right.
Yes.
He says, the first time you do it, you're going to mess it up. I think you know the other word instead of mess up.
Yes.
You're going to mess it up, right? The second time you do it, you're going to mess it up, but you're going to know why you messed it up. And then the third time, you're going to get it right.
There
so honestly, that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
And not just football. That's how life is, right? First time you do it, you might mess up, and you probably don't know what happened. Like, why did this happen? Why did I mess this up? Why wasn't I successful on this thing or whatever I'm doing? Then the second time you do it, you might mess up again, but now you're going to know exactly, or at least have an idea of how you messed up, why you messed up, and now you have the ability to correct it. So this gives the guys a chance to at least mess up that first time. Guys went through it the season last year. They're on a third, fourth time messing stuff up. Hopefully they're not messing stuff up anymore.
Yeah.
But that repetitive, keep doing it over and over again. And you don't do it so you get it right, Lance. You do it enough times so you don't get it wrong. That's the great thing about having these reps out here and getting everybody out there and throwing in all of those defenses in at once to get guys out there. And then let's say the middle linebacker makes a mistake. Now that's corrected. Now everybody sees that correction. So it's not just him making a mistake. Everybody saw that, so everybody can correct it.
Especially even the guys that weren't even in on the play.
Right.
They can see.
The backup linebacker, the other linebackers, the safety is like,
Yep.
okay, so that was his responsibility. He wasn't supposed to be out on the flat. He was supposed to be in the hook. It's stuff like that. It's always good for me, like, And I honestly embraced that, what Joe Vitt told me, because I was a guy who I asked a lot of questions, but then I would go out there and sometimes the brain be moving a little too fast or not fast enough, I should say, in my body, and then I might mess it up. But then like the second time I do it, like I always understood, like, all right, bro, like you knew better, or at least you know better now. And then the third time, I'll definitely get it right most of the time.
Now, did you have a notebook? Were you a note taker?
Bro, listen, I have notebooks on notebooks on notebooks.
There you go. Okay.
I'm not just a visual guy. I have to go out there and do it. Like,
I'm with you.
That's why when Joe said that to me, I was like, all right, that makes me feel okay, because I know when I do something, like when I do it on paper and I do it, and I'm probably gonna mess it up. Like that, I have to write it down. I have to see it. I have to write it down, and I have to do it at least one time.
Sure.
At least one time. And for me, it's like if I do it wrong, and coaches don't allow, like, not say they don't allow, they don't let mistakes go uncorrected, right? They don't let the mental errors go uncorrected. So once something like that happens, it gets corrected. And now everybody knows that, okay, that's not what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to do it this way. So now that's just more information. That's just more information being spit out. And OTAs, like you said, this is the time to mess up. This is the time to blow calls. This is the time to blow coverages. Not during the season. Definitely not December, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to your point, there's reinforcement going on at this time of the year. And I think that adds up in terms of totality by the time you get to meaningful football with respect to that. Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas with you here, Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, going over the process from a mental perspective. Jonathan gave some great insight in terms of when you're in year two of a defense or an offense and you still have some new players and where the learning curve is. The other topic that I want to get to, and an opportunity for you to weigh in as we move forward here at 201-939-4513. It's always interesting around this time of the year to look at the makeup of the roster and wonder, okay, who has the most to gain? Now, yesterday, John and I were on. We talked about position battles. Well, let's take it a step further. There's specific players within position battles that are entering critical years. Then there's other players that have contractual obligations that they need to think about in terms of maybe this is the end of their contract or the team has to decide whether or not to pick up their option. And then it's a matter of maybe they're eligible to have a breakout campaign. So I think it's an interesting exercise, Jonathan. Let's go around the roster. Really, there's no limitations to this. And one guy that keeps coming up to me when I go through this process is Azeez Ojulari.
Yep.
To me, I think he's a very strong candidate to say he has so much to gain this season. He had the really good rookie year, led the team with 8 sacks, then unfortunately was limited to just 7 games last year. Now, I understand that, he still has a few years on the rookie contract. I'm not saying that this is the end of the line, but remember, he was a second-round pick, so they don't get the 5th-year option. But Kayvon Thibodeau entering year 2, if Azeez can, A, stay healthy, B, return to that rookie form, now you're talking about 2 edge rushers that the opposition needs to think about, and Azeez is the X factor in that group because he can help Kayvon Thibodeau and also help the guys on the interior, vice versa. So I would say Azeez Ojulari is the first guy that comes to mind in this conversation.
You know what? When I'm looking at the roster right now, just like you are, I'm looking at the depth chart, and he was the first guy that that stuck out to me because of the potential. Right? Last year we saw him in limited snaps. Even in those 7 games, there were limited snaps. Right? Yep. But his productivity was probably number 1 on the defense, because he got limited snaps, but he was very, very productive. And that's how he's been his whole career. He just need to stay healthy, right? I think this is a chance for him this year, like you said, to go out there and prove that he is durable, or he can be durable, right? And then, of course, he's a playmaker, because anytime we've seen him on the field, he's making plays. Like that's something that we can't question about him. He is a playmaker. He's a game changer. When you can affect the passer in this league in 2023, you're a game changer. He's one of them. Kayvon Thibodeau's one. Kayvon had the knee injury early.
Yep.
He's a guy that bounced back and finished the season strong. I throw Kayvon in there. I throw Evan Neal in there.
Sure.
I throw Mark Gowinski. A lot of guys that were on the shelf kind of in and out the rotation last year. Can they solidify themselves as durable men, right? We talk about availability being probably the best ability that you can have. You can't play in the NFL if you're not healthy, and that's just what it is. So look forward to some of these guys having great campaigns this year and staying healthy, because the guys that I named, if they stay healthy, they're going to have good years. They're going to be productive, because that's the type of players there are. I'll throw Waller in that mix. Waller's a guy who can catch 1,500 yards of passing. He can catch 12 touchdowns, right? He's that type of guy. Can he stay healthy? That's the main question. And, I mean, the Giants roster is full of guys like that. Beavers, Colin Johnson, you can go through the entire Sterling Shepard, right? Sure. A guy who's been in the league, one of the leaders on this team, one of the better receivers, I think, in the NFL, but his health has let him down over the years, right? Can he stay healthy and finish the season out, right? Because I think if he can, he's a tough guy. He can play over the middle. He's smart. He's a leader. He's a cheerleader, one of the best I've ever seen in the NFL as a player, right? And that means something to the Giants. Let me tell you something about Sterling. He's been in the league a little bit now, and he was one of the only guys that is still on the Giants when I was playing for the Giants.
Exactly. 2016.
Right? He means so much to this organization. Like the times I was around him last year after the Indianapolis game, and I just watch how the guys just kind of look to him for the night, look to him, for leadership, look to him to say something. Like, he means so much. If they can get him healthy this year, he would mean so much more than his snaps on the field. He would mean so much more in that locker room. He would mean so much more to the morale of the team, right? And, I mean, that's a hard question because I want to pick everybody on the roster.
Well, you named about half the roster already. I was going to say, are you going to leave me any room to throw out another player, or are you just going to hog everybody?
Bellinger.
No, but in all seriousness, there are two guys you mentioned quickly in passing, and I was going to go in that direction. You mentioned Darian Beavers, and Beavers is another player. Unfortunately, he didn't play at all last season. He got hurt in the preseason. And actually, when Bobby Okereke spoke to the media earlier today, Jonathan, he was asked about who stood out to him. He mentioned two guys at linebacker, which I found interesting. He mentioned Micah McFadden, but he also brought up Darian Beavers and the word potential. Now that Beavers is back in the flow because he was sidelined last year, that they feel he gets out there, he can maximize his snaps. And you look at the interior linebacker positions, I mean, it really is wide open. I mean, Okereke comes in, and he's been extremely active for the Colts. Jared Davis did a nice job when he came to the team late last season. But Beavers could come in, assuming he's fully healthy, Jonathan, in week one, depending, of course, how often Wink plays linebackers, right? I mean, we don't know. You're smirking. You played that position. He could go with an extra safety. Anything's possible. But if he goes with an additional linebacker, and Beavers, remember, has the flexibility to drop back in coverage. We saw that at the collegiate level. I think Beavers, who knows, he may be neck and neck with Ojulari in terms of the most of the game. But for Beavers, it's more playing time as opposed to Ojulari. It's production / staying healthy.
Yeah, and we saw glimpses of Beavers last year in training camp. He looked really
fantastic.
Good. He looked strong at the point of attack, looked like he was a smart guy, can diagnose stuff, and he can play all three downs, right? He can play in those passing situations.
And that's what's most appealing about
it. Now you have a guy who, in Okereke, who's a proven three-down linebacker. He's a guy who's proven it, not just show glimpses of it. He's proven that he can do that. Jared Davis is a guy that's proven he can do first and second down. He's a guy that shows he's a solid force in the run game. But the Giants need at least two linebackers that are three-down linebackers, right? And I don't like when they take linebackers off the field.
Surprise.
Like
the stunning development on this show, yes.
Because now offense is what they do, and I think the Giants are going to do this year. It'd be crazy if they didn't do it. It's like you line up in tiger or zebra personnel.
There you go.
11 or 12, 11 or 12 personnel, right? And they run looks that look like either all 4 wide receiver plays, which is 11 or 10 personnel, or they can run 22 personnel, right? They can run different formations depending on what that defense has out there, right? I remember one time I had cursed Spags out. We were playing against the Patriots, and we were stuck in zebra, which is 11.
Giants or Saints, by the way, just for
Giants.
Okay.
This is here. Okay. No more Saints talk. Okay.
Well, you brought in a lot of New Orleans talk, so I want to make sure we're on the same page. All right, continue.
So when I was playing for the Giants,
yes,
my first year here, we were in a nickel package. Actually, we were in dime, which is one linebacker, and we were matching that against the Patriots 11 personnel with Gronkowski at tight end and LeGarrette Blount in the backfield. So a 260-pound tight end,
monsters,
a 250-pound running back, and I love Craig Dahl. We had Craig Dahl playing linebacker. Okay, what they
who was
did
mainly
was
a safety, by the way.
Yes,
I'm sure our fans understand that.
they just looked at us and they said, okay, you're going to keep Craig Dolan. We're going to run the ball right at you whenever we go 11 personnel and you have Diamond, right? And I looked at Spags and I said, you better get Brinkley. Remember Jasper Brinkley?
Sure. Yeah.
You better get Brinkley in here right now. Because I can't, like, this is, we getting blown off the ball. Like, and I love Craig Dolan, but he's not a linebacker. The thing is, these offenses will trick you into running those small defenses with those one linebacker defenses.
Especially in New England.
And they will run that ball right down your throat. In this division, you got to believe you need 2 linebackers on the field to match up. And, of course, you go 4 wide. That's a different story. But if you got that tight end in the game, you need 2 linebackers. Wink, you hear me? 1 tight end, 2 linebackers, all right?
Well, and maybe the rest of the NFC East, to your point, you get the message because if Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger are on the field at the same time, right, opponents need to prepare accordingly.
That's what I'm saying. Like the Giants with Waller being in this offense, he opens up the offense so much. He's a guy who you can split out wide. You can put him in the slot. You can put him at tight end down with his hand in the ground. You can put him at H-back. You can put him at fullback. You can do so many things with a guy like that. He has the speed to beat the coverage. He has the strength, and I didn't realize how tall he was till just now. I see him in the hallway.
Yeah, he could be a basketball player, Waller.
Yeah, for sure. And he's going to do so many things for this offense. And not just him, but because Bellinger is as solid as he is. And he can be a reliable guy in the passing game at that tight end position, at that H-back position, at that fullback position. It just all opens up the offense so much. And then with the amount of receivers that the Giants have in the building, maybe not. And I listened to your list. You had receivers number 1.
I did have receivers number 1.
Which
yes,
was
and I
very
proudly
surprising,
stand behind that.
But I
yes.
understand your point. The amount of depth for guys that have valuable experience in the NFL, there's probably not another room like that. I fully agree with you. So think about that, and that means a lot of those guys could be versatile guys. A lot of guys can be plugged in different places, and that just creates the versatility for the offense, and that's what you need in 2023. You have to look at that defense and be able to mix it up and throw in different looks. Send out Waller and put him at tight end. Send out Waller and put him at wide receiver in the same form, in the same set, not substituting guys off the field. That's how you catch those defenses off guard. All of a sudden, Waller's at tight end. All of a sudden, Waller's spit out. Bellinger's in the game. Like, you can create a lot of different mismatches if you have versatility on offense, which I think the Giants do right now.
Same personnel group, but you do different things within that personnel group. And real quickly, you brought up wide receiver. The other guy that I wanted to bring up is Colin Johnson. I'm with you. He also has a lot to gain because much like Beavers and several of these injured players, Jonathan, they're almost forgotten, right? Because we think about the players that were on the field last season. We think about the additions in free agency, the draft, but you forget you're really getting additions who were technically on the roster last season, but unfortunately didn't play. And Johnson, like Beavers, had a very good camp. He's got size. He has length. He brings something different to this receiver group, and he's also a veteran with experience coming over from Jacksonville. If he could stay healthy, that's another guy that not only could just carve out a role. I'm not just talking about being a complimentary eat-up roster spot guy. I think he could be an extremely productive player within this scheme. So Ojulari, Beavers, Johnson, those to me are the top 3
Yeah, I like that list.
that I would put out there.
That's a good list. I think you throw all the injured guys in there as second tier of that group.
Yep.
You throw all the injured guys in there because when you're injured, you got a lot to prove the next year. That's just what it is. You gotta show them that you're at least somewhat of the guy you were the year prior.
Well, because you have more competition also coming onto the roster too.
And that's the great thing about the Giants and what they did this offseason. They brought in some guys. They brought in some talent. They drafted really well, I think, this year, right? And they also brought in some good key free agent acquisitions. So look for there to be a competitive, OTAs and this last phase of OTAs. And then in training camp, expect it to be a competitive training camp. And expect the roster not to be produced, the depth chart not to be produced till right before the first game. If not, the morning of the first game. I don't know how that works, maybe Wednesday of that week. But whatever it is,
normally Wednesday they release it publicly. Yeah.
It's going to go down to the wire. I think it is because the Giants have competitors at every position. They have talent at every position now, even at the quarterback position.
As long as they keep enough linebackers to appease you. That's the most important thing. That should be the
times.
priority for Brian Dable and Joe Shane when they finalize the roster. Forget the other details.
Don't be clowning me because
I'm
the
not
Giants
clowning you
gave
at all.
5 yards a carry last year.
You had me at that.
750
the run
yards
defense
against the Eagles.
Sure.
I'm all about that, all right?
Yeah.
Let's stop the run, okay?
Well, that's why
the run.
A'Shawn Robinson and Nacho
help
you in that cause, but you need the linebackers to clean it up.
Yes, sir.
That's where you come in and prove your true
Not
value.
me. I'm not on
Well,
that
I was
field,
just talking
Lance.
about you represent
I don't
that
want to go out there
position.
and hit nobody.
I was simply saying you are still an ambassador for linebackers in this league, okay? That's how I associate
Hey,
you.
Lance, I was out there with the media just now. One of the guys came up to me. He was like, man, you look good. You should give us some snaps. I said, bro, I'm not trying to hit nobody. You crazy?
We'll allow you to just utilize the vocal cords now.
There you go.
That's what you work
Appreciate
out
that.
in terms of broadcasting. All right, few reminders before we open up the phone lines. Giants Huddle Podcast, you can check that out on your favorite podcast platform. You go to giants.com/podcast as we have different interviews on a variety of different topics. As we move forward to the 2023 NFL schedule, it is officially out and single-game tickets are on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. You can visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. And on the same topic, Giants fans, you can also take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And as we go through this journey, last but not least, the Giants official connected TV streaming app is Giants TV. It brings you original video content and game highlights on demand, direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. As we were talking about breakout candidates, players with the most to gain is the label that we're focusing on. An opportunity for you to weigh in at 201-939-4513. You can hit us up, hashtag Giants Chat. We threw out several different names on both offense and defense. And Jonathan and I focusing on players that were injured, but also players that may be arriving on the roster for the first time this year, and maybe they have something to prove. For example, Bobby Okereke, he had been a solid component of the Indianapolis defense. I'm sure he's hungry now to go out there and show that he could be just as productive around different teammates within a new scheme. Remember, Okereke has no history with Wink. Indy had Gus Bradley as their defensive coordinator. Wink was in Baltimore, so there's no connection there. I mean, I think he could be an extremely valuable player within this defense. And it goes back to what you were talking about, somebody that can help stop the run, somebody that has the versatility to stay on the field for all three downs. So, maybe he doesn't have an overwhelming amount to gain, but maybe has an opportunity to really go out there and prove that he is an extremely versatile player, just as much as we saw within the confines of that Indy defense.
Yeah, and you think about the Giants, right? The Giants historically over the years, over the decades, right? The Giants have been known to be a physical, a smash-mouth football team on offense, right? A really good quarterback that can, that stands in the pocket, that's tough. Phil Simms, Eli Manning, right? A defensive line that'll just disrupt everything, and some really good linebackers. But the narrative, especially the last 10 years, is that the Giants don't have linebackers since Antonio Pierce. That's been the narrative. How do you think I feel about that?
Oh, right? I can only imagine. You can still take it personally. I can tell.
Definitely.
I can feel the emotion.
And that's something I think a guy like Okereke can change that narrative, right? Jared Davis, Beavers, right? Micah McFadden, these guys are here. These guys are playmakers. And you better believe these are prideful individuals that understand that is the narrative, that the Giants don't have linebackers. And some of these guys were on the team last year. And that was the narrative last year, that the Giants don't have linebackers. The Giants need linebackers. So not only is that the narrative, but the great thing about this is that people talk all of that. They get to go out there and have a chance to prove it, right? And I don't know Okereke, but I play linebacker, and I know, you don't really listen to everything, but you know what's going on. You know the narrative out there. So you better believe he's going to have it in himself to validate his, he got paid, Sure. You got to validate that somehow, some way, because the Giants fans going to let you know if you don't play well. And I think he's a guy who is going to play well. And I think he's a guy that's going to be a leader, and he's going to have other guys playing well around him as well.
As far as other players that maybe we didn't bring up that fit under this umbrella, most to gain coming into the spring as well as training camp as we gear up for the start of the season, I want to go back to wide receiver. You brought up Sterling Shepard. I mentioned Colin Johnson. How about Wan'Dale Robinson, right? He's another one of the Darian Beavers of the world and the Colin Johnsons. 6 games, Jonathan. That's all he played last season. People forget he had the knee injury early
yep.
which kept him sidelined. And then, unfortunately, tore the ACL in Week 11 against the Detroit Lions. That was his best game, though. He had 9 catches, 100 yards, right? He was moving the chains.
Great.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, wasn't able to build off of that. But now you look at the versatility you were talking about within the receiving core, how they can have the same personnel group on the field, move guys around, and try to keep defenses on their toes. Robinson is that versatile weapon. Very good after the catch. He can have the speed to take the top off the ball. He's elusive. He stays healthy. You know, we were having this conversation the other day about maybe who may lead the team in receptions. Darren Waller, Isaiah Hodgins come to mind. In terms of receiving yards, Wan'Dale Robinson could very well be in the conversation if he could stay on the field because he has that big playmaking ability.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw just glimpses of him last year. And even when he was in, he was still limited because he was coming off of an injury.
And still learning the offense, too, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
you're seeing a guy who was probably at 80%. I don't know. He wasn't when you're playing in the NFL and you're hurt early, you're not 100% when you come back. You just can't.
And you're playing catch-up once you get back, right?
And we're talking about the playbook. He's new.
Yep.
This is all new stuff to him, right? And we saw flashes last year that showed, okay, he has promise. He shows a guy that has potential to be a game changer. I don't think that has changed. I think that's still the same thing. You know, I don't know about the receiving yards. I'm thinking more of receptions. And I'm looking at Daniel Jones, his accuracy and the way he throws the ball between the hashes, and that's where he's going to be. That's where Wan'Dale's going to be because he's going to play most likely predominantly in the slot.
Sure.
So with him and Waller there as those two guys opposite sides or the same side, look for those because Daniel Jones, I think his best passes are passes over the middle and inside of those hashes. I think he was extremely accurate last year between the hashes. I think he did a great job. So look for Wan'Dale Robinson, even Bellinger, you know, because people are going to understand who Waller is. Not going to. People understand who Waller is. So Waller might get that double coverage on third down. He might get that. So you're going to look for other guys. Look for Daniel Bellinger. Look for Wan'Dale Robinson, a healthy Sterling Shepard. Guys that are familiar with playing around the middle with a linebacker's lurk, right? Because that's a great look. I watched last year. There wasn't too many down the field passes, but what we saw from Daniel Jones was him at times being extremely accurate over the middle. Over routes, under routes, dig routes, crossing routes, sit down routes. Just him being a great passer of the football, not the prolific thrower down the field, because I don't think the offense was demanding that of him last year as much as we've seen in years prior, especially his rookie year. But look for guys like a Wan'Dale, look for guys like Waller to have a lot of success in this offense, but not really down the field throws. Those over the middle intermediate throws, which I think Daniel Jones excelled at.
And those were the catches he made if you go back and watch that Lions game. Mm-hmm. Exactly what you're talking about. I'm just looking at it after the catch. I think Robinson could do a lot of damage.
Great things.
So he could turn a 10-yard reception over the middle, as you pointed out, but then he could get maybe 10 more yards, and now all of a sudden it's a 20-yard reception. So that capability could maybe present him as a threat within the receiving yardage total, of course, depending on flexibility, versatility, and, of course, number one is health. All right, let's open up the phone lines.
Can I throw out a name real quick?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, as Pearson wants to join the conversation.
I think Evan...
Jonathan barely left anybody on the roster for you to name.
I know.
But I'm interested to hear this.
I like Evan Neal. I think.
Well, he did throw out Neal,
okay,
in fairness.
Yeah,
Jonathan, because remember, I told you, he named half the roster.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Andrew Thomas, in his second year, really gotten a rhythm.
Yeah.
I think Neal with an offseason to get healthy and get used, maybe a more steady offensive line, I think he could be really good this year.
No, I think Neal is definitely a good one. Remember, he also, Jonathan, was dealing with injuries.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that was a big theme last year. A lot of the guys we brought up. So can he stay healthy? And if he does, do you see more consistency out of him like you did with Andrew Thomas? Because what did we talk about Andrew Thomas that first year? He was dealing with the ankle issue, right? Of course that's going to impact your play.
Yep. And I look for him to improve. I think last year people were talking about his struggles that first Cowboys game when he couldn't hold what's it, Lawrence?
DeMarcus
Lawrence.
Yeah.
He couldn't hold him.
That was week 3.
It was really bad that game. And then we saw some improvement, but he was still hurt. And I was saying that all year. I'm like, you can see he has problems shifting off of that knee. He's struggling with that knee. So I definitely look for him to improve, not only with his health, but also what we talked about earlier, having that familiarity with the playbook another year, right? it's going to be a lot easier for him this year. It's not going to be easy because that's a hard position to play, but he's going to be a little bit more comfortable. How about that? He's going to be a little bit more comfortable with the knowledge and also with his physical health. So I definitely expect him to have a great year this year.
Let's open up the phone lines at 201-939-4513. We check in with Cliff in New York joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Cliff?
Hey guys, thanks for the show. It's good. I'm into this most to gain thing, and I was also thinking OL. I'm thinking of guys like Matt Parrott and Devery Hamilton and Corey Cunningham, because if we're going to really be the juggernaut that I'm looking for, everybody knows that we're going to need the strong rotation in both trenches that we had when we were champions, and I think we got to see some sleepers coming out to be those guys that are going to really make a difference in the middle. Everybody's going to expect Schmitz to come through, so I don't know what that's about. But I guess I'm focused on the guards and the swing tackle. I mean, whoever can come through as a standout in those positions seems to me really has a lot to gain, if not the most.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And you think about where I think the Giants struggled last year was along the offensive line, and not just the performance. It's the continuity and the consistency because of all the injuries that you had. And then every week they would ask Dayball, who's playing at guard this week? Who's playing here? Who's playing there? And he's always like, we're going to see at practice, right? Now they have a chance to go ahead and, like you said, solidify themselves, and you're not just 5 offensive linemen. You need at least 8 offensive linemen in case one of those guys go down. And Cliff, like you're saying, those swing linemen, when you bring in an extra tackle sometimes, and even a guard that can be versatile and maybe bounce out to play tackle. You need to identify who your top 8 offensive linemen are, who your top 8 offensive linemen are going to play week in and week out. And like you said, there are some guys on the roster who may not be in that top 5, but it's 6, 7, and 8, and it's going to be very valuable to the Giants' offense this year.
Well, Hamilton, who you brought up, is versatile. I remember Bobby Johnson spoke last year, and they were throwing him literally at every single position. So that bodes well for him. I'd actually throw out Tyree Phillips as maybe a strong potential swing tackle guy, Cliff. And that was
Forgot about him.
Yeah, you didn't bring up. I'd probably put him ahead of all the other names you mentioned.
Yes.
And then in terms of the most to gain on the interior, I'd probably throw out Marcus McKeithen, because here's another guy. Part of the rookie class last year, did not play, got hurt early, and they look at him, I think, more as a guard as opposed to a tackle. If you're looking for somebody that is interchangeable, Jonathan, that you were talking about, and wants to solidify a roster spot, a part of those 8 or 9 guys, to me, McKeithen may be the intriguing guy on the interior, but Phillips I'd focus on more maybe as that swing tackle.
Yeah. One thing I noticed when Joe Shane first arrived was that he seemed to know Matt Parrott's name. I mean, I guess he knew all kinds of guys that we had because of the work he was doing at Buffalo, analyzing all the players coming out. So everybody that we drafted those couple of years, he was very familiar with. And I just got the impression, just from the way he said his name, that he liked Matt. And
go ahead, Cliff. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody else noticed that.
No, I think that's an astute observation, and appreciate the phone call, Cliff. Clearly, Parrott, unfortunately has dealt with some injuries, but the appeal for him coming out of UConn, Jonathan, was he's got that length. You could use him at left and right tackle because he had experience there. So you always want to have somebody that you could bring in that in a pinch, God forbid, due to injury, you can throw them on any side of the line. But I think what hurt him is, unfortunately, remember, he got hurt late the previous season against the Eagles. And when you're talking about an ACL injury late in the season, that puts you behind the 8 ball compared to the other guys that were coming in. So I don't want to say that he became an afterthought, but there were other guys that were getting on the field that were moving ahead of him. And then all of a sudden, as the season progressed, he starts to get closer to 100%. And now you hope with maybe a full offseason that he could participate, because he's now well over a year removed from the injury, that maybe that gets him back into the mix. But Joe Shane, remember, he was a scout. He was doing a lot of the legwork in Buffalo underneath Brandon Beane. So it's no surprise that he knew the Giants class, even though he didn't draft these guys, because he was going out on the road and he was getting familiar with all of that personnel.
And if this hasn't been proven yet, Joe Shane is pretty good at his job. So I think he would know players, right? I think he
something
would
tells me.
Understand
that would be in his wheelhouse.
Who the players are and probably how to pronounce their names as well, right? And I look at this offensive line, and yeah, they only added a couple guys, J.C. Hausner and John Michael Schmitz Jr. But again, having the familiarity with the offense, right? Having familiarity with guys, and then also showing the versatility from guys like Shane Lemieux, from guys like Azudu, Bredesen, guys that kind of moved around last year all on the offensive line, I think solidifies depth and also utility from these guys. And that's something that was very questionable last year because there was a lot of questions. Now I think the questions are not as many. I think there's still some because we need to know who exactly is the starting 5 offensive linemen, and then who's that 6th and 7th guy when you get that extra tackle and that rotational guy as well, right? And there's a lot of potential I see here. And look, I hope everybody stays healthy, but if 1 or 2 guys go down, I look at this depth of the offensive linemen, and it makes me a lot more comfortable than I was last year, even during the season.
Well, by my count, you're in the ballpark of about 15 offensive linemen on the roster right now, okay? Yeah, that's big volume. But we're talking about, Jonathan, 8, 9 guys at max is who you're going to keep, okay? Very rarely do you go in the double figures. And remember, 5 of them are your starters. Mm-hmm. So there's really only 3 to 4 spots we're talking about behind the starters. And to your point, even though left guard is up in the air, is it Azudu, is it Bredesen? In all likelihood, barring a major disappointment or an injury, I would say whoever doesn't win the starting job is probably going to have a good chance to make the roster because he's going to be the insurance policy, right? So you could argue, you got 6 penciled in right now.
Yep.
Now, John Michael Schmitz, he played center solely in college. Minnesota, though, feels, and we actually recently spoke with J.P. Fleck, the head coach of Minnesota. That'll be up on the Giants Huddle podcast in the upcoming weeks. And he believes he still has the flexibility to maybe be thrown into guard. But if you have Bredesen and Azudu and Glowinski, and Shane Lemieux is obviously in the mix, it's not, to me, a huge necessity that your center, right, has the ability to play guard. But it's important, Jonathan, somebody else who can slide into center. Right, has to be on the roster, whether it's Asenauer, whether it's one of your guards. Now, Bredesen can be moved to center, so maybe he's the answer. But, that's the thinking. That's the dialogue that goes on between Bobby Johnson, the O-line coach, and Brian Daboll and Joe Shane when they have to take 15 guys and they have to cover them down to 8 or 9.
And they didn't draft John Michael Schmitz to possibly be a guard. They drafted him to play center.
100%.
100%.
Yep.
But then before the draft, the name that Joe Shane kept on bringing up was Bredesen. And he mentioned other guys, but I would listen to who he said first. And he said Bredesen several times first. So better believe Bredesen has been receiving a lot of center snaps, not just during this first, second, and third phase, but at home. I'm sure the guy's been practicing at center home. Because if you have any type of, confidence or thought like, hey, I might play center next year, I need to practice this. I need to practice some snaps. So he probably taking snaps from his high school quarterback, you know what I'm saying? Just to kind of get that experience and having that, John Michael Schmitz drafting him so early and a potential first rounder, but then having that insurance in Bredesen, because we always thought that the Giants was going to bring in possibly somebody, whether it was free agency or the draft, at the center position, and they actually did it through the draft. But the whole time, I think Bredesen and other guys, J.C. Hausner, am I saying that name right?
Hasenauer.
Hasenauer?
Yeah.
Dang, I was butchering that name. Sorry, Jay. I'm just going to call him J.C. J.C.
Stick to the first name.
Yeah,
yes.
Same as me.
Your initials.
Yeah.
That's good.
So bringing him in, so he brought in 2 centers, J.C. and then also John Michael Schmitz. But they've been working Bredesen the whole time. So if anything happens, I think first up at that center position is Bredesen. I think if anything happens to John Michael Smith, Bredesen is that first guy in because that's the guy that they've been considering basically since last year anyway.
It's funny. You were talking about practicing at home. Bredesen, and maybe he's looking in the mirror as he's doing it too. I don't know. You could provide maybe some insight, as I'm sure you were yelling out the play calls at home and staring at yourself in the mirror. But anyway, getting back to the point at hand, it reminded me of, remember Kevin Zeitler, who was on the Giants offensive line? He had a baby when he went to the Ravens.
Oh, yeah.
So his wife was in the hotel room, the hospital room, and he's practicing his alignment on the offensive line while she's in labor. I mean, once again, that to me is the dedication of maximizing your time when you're not on the football field. I don't know why, but it was a Giants connection, so it reminded me your story of Zeitler.
But don't forget what school he went to. He's a Badger.
Okay, so see,
O-line
overlooked
U.
that. I'm sorry.
O-line U.
So I should have known that right off the top.
Other schools are doing this, but Wisconsin,
100%.
they're definitely kick-stepping when their baby's born. You know what I mean?
Well, because when you arrive,
we're doing it in the delivery room.
When you arrive on campus, the coaches tell you there are no excuses.
That's it.
Births, parties.
That's it.
You always have to find room.
And I don't know if he had a boy or a girl, but he was teaching them early from the day he was born. This is what you're about. You're kick-stepping. You're power-stepping. Pancakes are not just a breakfast, okay?
There you go.
Zeitler, though, I love him. He was a great kid, great player at Wisconsin, great player with the Bengals, did some things with the Giants as well. He's a little off, though. He's a little off. I don't know how many guys are doing that in the
I was going to say.
in the delivery room. That's a little OD. But listen, you can tell he cared about that position. You could tell he cared about his job. You need a whole bunch of guys like that on your roster. Maybe not the day your baby's born, but, at home for sure.
Listen, you are not questioning his dedication
not
to the
at
sport,
all.
Okay? Because the evidence is overwhelming. So it just reminded me when you're talking about practicing at home and maybe being in the mirror and so forth. But the point is well taken, circling back to planet Earth here in our conversation about the depth growing on the offensive line, but still you're limited in terms of who you could keep, and versatility is always going to be the guiding light. Players are far more valuable who are interchangeable between guard and center, guard and tackle. Highly unlikely one of your backup offensive linemen plays just one position. Jonathan, you don't have the numbers game to afford you to be in that position, because you need to feel as if one of your starters goes down and you're only keeping 8 total offensive linemen, of those 3 guys, center, guard, tackle, maybe you can have a guy that does special teams / offensive line work, but at the end of the day, they have to be able to be put in various different situations and to be able to thrive under those circumstances.
Yeah, I think that 6th and 7th offensive linemen, they need to be versatile, right? Yes, they have to play special teams. Like, you're not playing in the league and you're not a starter and not playing on special teams. That's not happening. They're trying to do away with the kickoff, man. I'm sorry to segue to that.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. I did want to get your thoughts. Yeah.
What are we doing, Lance? Are we getting rid of special teams? We getting rid of a lot of jobs, man. I'm pissed off, man. I'm not excited about that.
Well, see, this is why you don't have to stress as much when you don't play.
This is true.
You can just think about it from afar. You don't have to worry about losing your 53-man roster spot. Well, since you went there, though, in all seriousness, the rule that you're talking about is they're discussing, and we don't know if it's going to be long-term. Next year is going to be more of an experimentation, but if the ball is fair caught within the 25-yard line, you get it at the 25.
25-yard line.
And I was talking about this with John the other day. Why take the risk?
Right.
To return it, Jonathan. If you get an opportunity to put it starting field position at the 25.
Just offensive.
Yeah.
Just love offense. Just all offense. Why? Can we get a little defense, man? Can we start backed up on the 3-yard line because it was a tremendous kick and coverage unit? No. They're taking that from us. No backed up. There's gonna be no offensive plays where it's backed up this year. I mean, off of a kick return. For me, that's like, man, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't like it. Okay, I don't.
Clearly, you don't.
I mean, because
I was unsure. I thought you maybe were on the fence on this one. Yes.
When I played, kickoff was a real thing. Kickoff was, kicking from the 30-yard line instead of the 35. As a kickoff unit, you can run. You could start at the end zone. You could run all the way through. The wedge was a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
A wedge buster was a real thing. Those guys,
it's ancient history now.
Those guys are like Zeitler. They're a little off, I was a wedge buster. I'm a little off. But the pride in that, the pride in the special teamers. Pearson Prelo, he's a safety. He probably played 15 years in the NFL for several different teams. I don't know if he ever played safety on defense. He was a guy that excelled on kickoff, excelled on special teams, and he made a 14-year career out of that. Are we taking the Pearson Prelows out of the game now? You know, are we taking the Matthew Slaters out of the game?
Slater's another great example.
You know, it's like
New England.
I just don't know, man. I don't look. If we add more guys to the roster, okay, cool. But like, I feel like they're doing away with the very integral part of the game, which is, you know, it was a third of the game. Now it's maybe a fourth of the game now because they're kind of taking kickoff away, kickoff was for me, that's how I made my money early in my career. You know, my thing was go down and make a tackle on kickoff, go down and make a tackle on punt. You're not getting defensive snaps this week, so you got to show out on special teams. Now they almost taking that aspect away from guys that are, you know, maybe on that, you know, linebacker, safeties, tight ends, guys that are on that coverage unit. They're not going to be productive. They're not going to be able to show their athleticism. They're not going to be able to show their grit and their want to. And I feel like you see a lot of guys that gets exposed on special teams, you know, and it gets highlighted on special teams. And I feel like they're kind of taken away from that, and I just don't like it, Lance.
Well, you bring up actually an interesting point, all joking aside, because I think what you were getting at is if most teams are going to take the fair catch.
Why would you not, right?
Sure, but there may be a moment in the game because of time limitations where you do have to return it, right? You just don't have the luxury to maybe take the fair catch. And what happens if guys even on the coverage units are not being exposed, Jonathan? My point is on kickoffs throughout the course of the season, right? I mean, think about punt returns. Those are far and few. Now you limit kickoff returns. What happens now all of a sudden when you need guys to go out and tackle out in open field and they've had, one or two opportunities during the course of the regular season? But that's how you give up all of a sudden a big play when you least suspect, right? Because the fundamentals are not being reinforced in practice.
You cannot replicate a kickoff at practice. I'm sorry. You cannot do it. Guys are not going. I mean, even me, like, I would run down, but, like, I remember Louis Murphy was here with the Giants, right? And they had Louis Murphy back, and I was running down on kickoff, and I hit Louis Murphy really hard. He was like, "Come on, JC." I said, "Bro, I'm sorry. I got to do this. Like, this is what I have to do." You know, so you can't really replicate it until you have live reps. And, you know, that starts, of course, in preseason where you're running down on kickoff, and you got guys who literally win the roster spot because of kickoff.
Yep.
Right? You got guys like a Jared Davis, Roberson, he played for the Patriots. And we was watching him run down on kickoff and play defense. And we were laughing like he's dying out there. But the coaches see that, and that says something to them. That shows like, man, this dude just ran down on kickoff and made 3 or 4 tackles on this drive. All of a sudden it's like, who do we need that 49th, 50th, 51st, 52nd, 53rd guy? Who's that guy? All of a sudden, it's the guy that's been showing out on kickoff. That's the guy that's run down on kickoff and then play defense right afterwards, right? That's where I feel like you see the guy's grit. And grit is something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. People talk about skill. People talk about toughness. I think grit has all of those things combined in it, and that gets exposed, I think, on special teams more than anything else. And I was always a proponent to being out there the first play of the game. Not the first snap of the game, the first play of the game, which is kickoff.
There you go.
Now they're taking it from us, man.
Well, it's going to be interesting because here's the other thing that you were tapping into. In the preseason, though, Jonathan, they're going to want to evaluate these return men.
Yep.
Nobody's taking a fair catch in the preseason, right? In the preseason, they're going to return it. Then we're going to get to the regular season. Nobody is going to want to return it. So guys are going to have an opportunity to make the roster because of what they do in the preseason, and they're going to be nowhere to be found.
This is true. I didn't think about that.
Right?
You're right about that because they need to see it. And
exactly.
And it's probably going to be, the coach is going to be like, we're not fair catching, right? Because I need to evaluate this guy just like you, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we're kicking it to the 5-yard line and we're taking it out. But that's only in preseason because that doesn't make sense in the regular season. Because if I was a special teams coach, we're fair catching that thing because we're getting it to the 25.
Yep.
Right? That's just what it is, So it's a part of the game now. Let's hope it doesn't work. I hope it doesn't work. Bring back the kickoff, move it back, and let guys run 20 yards down the field.
Louis Murphy, by the way, not a Wisconsin Badger.
Definitely
it's
not.
important to know. See, if Louis Murphy was from Wisconsin, I don't think Jonathan would have hustled down the field and looked to hit him as hard. See, he's a Florida product. See, Wisconsin guys don't like Floridians. That's why. Okay?
Is that what it is?
There's been studies of this. You don't know. I have sources and resources. Yes.
Some of my best of friends in the NFL are Florida guys, okay?
Now you're
David,
backpedaling.
Jonathan Vilma.
Backpedaling.
Yeah, DRC, Jack Rabbit. These are my JPP. These are my guys, man. Hey, shout out to Florida, man. Much love.
Yeah. Well, that was more of Florida in terms of being a native. Not all of those guys went to schools in Florida, though.
Oh, okay. Come on, UF.
Okay.
Got you.
So I was talking more about Murphy went to Florida. He was a Gator.
Okay.
So you have a different feeling about individuals that suit up for schools in Florida as opposed to maybe reside there.
Shout out to Lou Murphy.
Okay.
Shout out to Major Wright. Major Wright,
That's
my
right.
guy,
Look at
too,
this.
in Tampa.
Former Chicago Bear, too.
Yeah, man.
Look at that. See? I mean, I didn't know you were going to test me in terms of all the defensive backs and defensive players. This is reminiscing. This is like my favorite activity when it comes to 90s NBA players. We'll save that for another edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, by the way. All right. That is going to wrap things up. Jonathan, always a blast, always fun going back and forth. Appreciate the insight as always. So today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. No show tomorrow since we are starting the Memorial Day weekend a little bit earlier, and no show on Monday. So Pearson is doing backflips right now, and literally he's doing them as I see it from the opposite end of the camera. So we'll be back up and running on Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. But the beauty is you go back to the archives, you can watch older editions of Big Blue Kickoff Live. You can rewatch any part of this show that you didn't see, and you can also check out some of the recent editions of the Giants Huddle podcast. With that being said, for Jonathan Casillas, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest. Enjoy the extended holiday weekend, and we'll speak to you on Tuesday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.